Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. Today we are going to take up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 7th of July 2021. The articles which we are going to cover today have been displayed on your screen. And let us now begin the discussion. Fresh stirrings on federalism as a new politics appears as a lead article on page number 6, where the authors talk about a very important topic for UPSC Civil Services Examination, which is federalism. The article, although is quite political, but can provide us grounds to cover this important topic as it is mentioned in the syllabus, issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure under GS paper 2. And you have seen how my seniors Baswa sir and Mangal sir have instructed me to cover this topic in great detail, and so it becomes my duty to cover it from the perspective of mains as well as prelims syllabus. Although federalism has been a very important topic for mains and prelims examination, but especially since last 1 year, a lot of steps taken by the central government have created a lot of problems with the states. For example, the refusal of the central government of its legal commitment to compensate for goods and services tax shortfall on account of lower revenue has angered the state, because the center argued that the lower revenues are a result of an act of God for which it cannot be held responsible. But as per the GST Act, states were guaranteed compensation for a revenue shortfall for the first 5 years ending up till 2022. Similarly, it seems like center has transgressed into the power of the state government. For example, the agriculture related laws, or you can say the recent farm laws which allow farmers to sell their produce outside the APMC, is actually can be said to be an encroachment on the state list, because agriculture as a subject finds its place in the second list of the 7th schedule. And so in this regard, we are going to initiate our discussion by first understanding what actually federalism is, why is it needed, and what are the features of Indian federalism. And then we are going to understand what are the peculiar challenges which are being faced by Indian federalism. And in the blue color, you will find the recommendation of the Punchi Commission, which was the Commission on the Center-State Relations for India, what it has recommended, how the constitution should be amended to provide for the reformed federalism with less amount of unitary bias. Let us now begin the discussion. Now, before going into federalism as a word, let us now first understand why is there a need for a country to adopt a federal system of government. Now, if you look at the countries across the world, they come in all shapes and sizes. They are made up of many different types of people from various kinds of backgrounds trying to live together as a nation. Now, how do we ensure that all these diverse people get sufficient political representation? And one of the ways to enable people from different backgrounds to live together is federalism. So put very simply, federalism is a system of government in which the power is divided between a central authority and multiple regional authorities. Now someone might ask, why is there a need to create 2 levels of government, and how is it going to exactly help people from diverse backgrounds in living together as one nation? And the simple answer is by sharing their power over the things they have in common, like the trade with the outside world or international trade. So a group of people, let's say A, B, C, they could be different in terms of language, ethnicity, but they see themselves as one as compared to the outside world. And so as far as international trade is concerned, they would want to deal with that as an entity together. Or for example, they want to fend off an foreign attack. They want to draw a boundary, an international boundary. For that purpose, they would like to see themselves as one, and so they would give up their powers on these matters and create a central authority known as center, which will look after these matters. But at the same time, these groups maintain some level of self-rule over those things that are not common. For example, education, primary health care, or for that matter, broadcasting, each of A, B and C would want to deal with these matters independently, and for that they would like to keep that power to themselves in the regional government. And so over the years, federalism has been recognized as the best system of the government to protect diversity in a population, because you have given powers to themselves to manage their own affairs in a lot of things. And for specifically doing this, you need first and foremost a written constitution which is not very easy to change, which is some kind of a rigid constitution which cannot be amended by parliament or by the central legislature. The constitution itself should create two levels of government. So right now I want your utmost attention. There are a lot of countries, for example China, which also has local governments, but still China is not a federal government because the constitution of China does not guarantees the perpetuation of these regional territories. You need these states to have existence independent of the center. And so the constitution creates two governments and itself divides the power between the center and the regional territories. Only then it will become a federation. And the best example of that would be United States of America, would be India, would be Australia, and also Canada. All these four nations are examples of federation, but the way the federations are arranged vary a lot from one country to another. And now let us look at India and try to understand whether India is a federation or not. India has a written constitution, which is true. Also, it has constitutional supremacy. At the same time, it is very difficult to amend the Constitution of India without the approval of the states if those provisions deal with the matters related to states. The Constitution itself has created the two levels of government under Part 5 and under Part 6. Also, India has a bicameralism or bicameral parliament, where we have a house known as Council of States, or also known as Rajya Sabha, which is about giving representation to the states at the central level. And then we have independent judiciary to make sure that the central government does not transgresses into the affairs of the states. So now we can see that India is a federation. But the problem is that there are a lot of mechanisms, there are a lot of provisions of the Constitution of India and the way they are carried out, which makes us believe that India is not truly a federal system, but rather a federal system with a unitary bias. And it is specifically because of this particular bias that most of the challenges to our federalism come from. And now we are going to understand those challenges and what Punchi and Sarkaria Commission have recommended in that accordance. And the main areas of concern mainly lies with the legislative powers or the way they have been divided, emergency provisions, office of the governor and the functioning of the governor, parliamentary legislation in the state fields, centralization of the amendment process of the constitution, and unequal representation given to the states in Council of States or the Rajya Sabha. And let us now deal with each one of them one by one. Now, as we have seen that federalism is all about division of powers and hence the legislative powers between the central and the state governments. And so in India you have list 1, in which the center has the prerogative to make laws, state 2, where generally the states make laws, but under certain special circumstances even the center can make laws, and concurrent list where both center and the states have the power to legislate laws. And then there is residuary power, the items which have not been mentioned anywhere in the constitution, which lies completely with the center. So if there is new thing, if there is a new item on which there is a need for a law, the center is the one which is going to enact the law. And so this is one of the most important and crucial points of disagreement between the states and the center and creates most problems. Because in the United States of American Constitution, the residuary power lies with the states. In fact, there is only one list which has been mentioned in the constitution and rest everything lies with the states, and that is why it is the best example of federation. And this is more like the Canadian constitution where the residuary power rests with the center. On matters of concurrent list, if both the center and the state enact law, and if the provisions clash, the central legislation would prevail. This is also a big cause of concern for the states. And we know that there are a lot of bills which can be reserved by the governor for the approval of the president on its own discretion. And all these three matters respectively are the ones which are creating challenges to our federalism. And in this regard, Punche Commission has recommended two important things. The first is that Punche Commission has recommended a set of broad agreement between the center and the state on the matters related to List 3. It has recommended that it is of utmost importance that a broad agreement be reached between the union and the states before introducing any particular legislation in parliament on matters of concurrent list. If there is a concurrence or an agreement before the introduction of the law, there would be no problem. And then it has recommended extreme restraint on behalf of the central government when it comes to enactment of a law which has not been mentioned either in List 1, List 2 or List 3 of Schedule 7, which is the residuary list. Then the next set of challenges come from the emergency provisions which have been contained in Part 18 of our Constitution, starting from Article 352 and going up to Article 360. Of course, these provisions have been created to enable the central government to meet any abnormal situation which might arise, and the rationale behind the incorporation of these provisions is to safeguard the sovereignty, unity and integrity of our country. But in practicality, what these provisions do is that they convert the federal character of our country to that of a completely unitary system. We know that imposition of national emergency makes unitary government all powerful with respect to the country. Similarly, the application of 356 or Article 356 or the precedent rule does the same for that particular state. And so it converts the federation into a unitary system without even going through a constitutional amendment, and that is what the problems state have with respect to these provisions. Apart from that, you have provisions in our constitution which enable the central to give directive to states. Let us know in the comment section which are those articles which enable the central government to direct the states to carry out certain responsibilities. And there is another article which says that if states fail to abide by the central directives, then it shall be legal on behalf of the central government to impose the precedent rule. And so in this particular regard, the Punche Commission has recommended the complete implementation of S.R. Bommai versus Union of India 1994 judgment, which set out a series of guidelines for the imposition of the precedent rule in a state. Of course, if we start discussing S.R. Bommai judgment, it will make this particular discussion very long, but in particular, it has laid down few rules which has to be followed by the governor before recommending imposition of precedent rule or dismissing of Council of Ministers in a state. Then all of us know that office of governor has been a long vexatious issue with respect to the states, be it the manner of appointment of a governor or reservation of bills by him or her, whether it is about appointment of chief minister in case of hung assembly, and be it about recommendation of precedent rules. All of the provisions given in the Constitution of India and the way they are actually used in day-to-day life have ruffled a lot of feathers with the state governments. And hence, most of the states and the committees constituted by them to rework the Constitution of India have recommended changes in the way the governor is appointed. And so in this regard, the Punche Commission has recommended quite a few things. First and foremost, the Punche Commission has given very extensive guidelines as to who can become governor of a state. And they mainly deal with a non-political person, a person not belonging to that particular state and not actively involved in politics should be appointed as a governor. Then Punche Commission has recommended a fixed 5-year tenure just like all other constitutional posts. Because when a tenure is fixed, you cannot lure that person into acting in your interest. If a tenure is fixed, the governor can act against the will of the central government also. Right now, governors act in accordance with the center because they know they can be removed at any time. And so because of that, the Punche Commission has recommended a proper impeachment process just like that of president. And these two, when combined, will give much needed autonomy to the post of governor and the way she functions. Then, we know that when state legislatures pass a bill, they can be reserved by the governor for the consideration by the president. And what they do is that they generally do not transmit it to the governor. They sit on it forever. And so the Punche Commission has recommended an amendment in the Constitution by inserting a clause that the bill can be reserved for at max 6 months. If the 6 months have passed, it will have to be sent back to the legislature. Then we also know that in cases of hung assembly, where no clear party or coalition gets the full majority, it matters a lot who is invited for the first time to form the government, because then they hold power for some amount of time, and in that they can do a lot of horse trading. And so the role of governor becomes very, very crucial in those circumstances. And so the Punchi Commission has recommended quite a detailed set of guidelines which has to be followed by the governors for inviting people to form government. And as far as the recommendation of President rules is concerned, again, the SR Bommai judgment's guidelines have to be followed. The only condition is that the governor cannot and should not dismiss any state government and a council of ministers without the floor test. Now, it is important to know that before SR Bommai judgment in 1994, the governors used to dismiss the council of ministers just by writing that this government does not command the majority on the floor of the legislature. And now the SR Bommai judgment has made it mandatory to conduct the floor test, and only if the Council of Ministers is not able to prove their majority on the house of the legislature, only then they can be dismissed. Now, if you compare the emergency provisions in Office of Governor from that of USA, there is no provision of emergency-like feature in USA, and the Office of Governor is not that of an appointee from the central government, but rather he or she is an elected person holding or commanding the real powers. And after completing these three major challenges, let us now look at some minor issues, starting with unequal representation. Now, if you look at the constitution of Rajya Sabha, which is the Council of States, all the states have varying degree of representation depending upon their population. But since it is a Council of States, most of the federations have given equal representation to all the states. For example, in USA, all the states have 2 members in the Senate, which is their Council of States. Now here the problem is that in case of India, parties commanding state governments in the largest states, for example Bihar, UP, Maharashtra, Karnataka, actually control the Rajya Sabha. And so rest other 24 states actually do not matter if you have state governments in 5 to 6 large states. And this is a problem, because as a council of states, you should have equal representation of all the states. And so that is why the Punchi Commission has recommended amendment to the constitution to enable the equality of seats in the Rajya Sabha as well. Then states complain a lot about centralization of the amendment process. Because if you look at the way Article 368 has defined the process of the amendment of the constitution, it is very, very centralized, because if an amendment to the constitution has to be initiated, it will only come, and it can only come from parliament. There is no way for the states. So if the states feel that there is something wrong with the constitution, they cannot pass any kind of proposal in their legislatures. And apart from that, major part of the constitution can be amended without the approval of the states. And even if a particular provision requires an approval, let's say half of the states, after giving their consent, they cannot withdraw from it after some time. So these are the problems with respect to the amendment procedure of the constitution, with respect to which the Punchi Commission has not recommended anything. Then the states also raise this issue of parliamentary legislation in a state field. Let us know in the comment section what are the 4 conditions in which the parliament can actually enact or enable a lot of legislations in the second list of 7 schedule. And just like amendment to the constitution, Punchi Commission has not recommended any particular suggestion or recommendation in this manner as well. So from the perspective of both prelims and mains examination, it is very crucial that you understand the concept of federalism, why is it needed, and what are the challenges with the federal structure which India has adopted. Let us now move on to the next discussion. The next article for discussion appears on page number 12. US left Afghan airbase without notice. So the US left Afghanistan's Bagram airfield after nearly 20 years by shutting off the electricity and slipping away in the night without notifying the base's new Afghan commander, who discovered the Americans' departure more than 2 hours after they left. And this is the continued process of pull out of US defense forces from Afghanistan. And for all those people who have entered into the preparation recently, it could be quite a difficult task to comprehend what has happened in Afghanistan in past 20 or 25 years. It is important to understand that in order to be able to appreciate India's neighborhood relation, and effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests. Because the mess which has been created by US in last 20 years is going to impact India in a big way. And so in this regard, we are going to first understand why did US invade Afghanistan to start with? And if it did invade, why is it withdrawing from Afghanistan? What were the main features of the Trump-Taliban deal? What Pakistan wants from Afghanistan? Why is India reaching out to Taliban, which is quite contradictory from India's policies and stances in the past? And what are the likely scenarios after the US has withdrawn from the Afghan soil? Let us now begin the discussion. So as you can see, the importance of Afghanistan for India. It of course is our neighbor, and more important than that, a stable Afghanistan is in the interest of not just surrounding countries but also for India, and all of us know why. And so the story goes back to 2001, weeks after September 11 or 9/11 terrorist attack on United States of America. US President George W. Bush declared war on Afghanistan, which was then completely ruled by Taliban regime. Now, why did US decide to attack Afghanistan? Because they gave harbor or they gave protection to the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, which was mainly responsible for World Trade Center demolition. And Taliban refused to hand over these terrorist organizations and their members to US. And since they refused to hand over the most wanted people, Osama bin Laden amongst the top, the United States of America decided to attack Afghanistan, get it free from not just the terrorist organization but also to dislodge the Taliban, and it did that. Within 2 to 3 years, the US announced that the major military operations in the country were over because they thought that the Taliban was completely annihilated, and now they started to move their focus from Afghanistan towards Iraq. Now since 2003, today is 2021. In last 17 to 18 years, why is now US decided to withdraw its troops completely from Afghanistan? Because one can easily argue that when we know that Taliban was completely removed or reduced to almost zero, why is now US pulling back? The US is pulling back because they have understood, they have realized long ago that the war in Afghanistan is unwinnable. There is no way they can completely get rid of local militias which are completely loyal to Taliban group. And not just President Joe Biden. 8 years ago, Mr. Barack Obama had promised to bring American troops back home from Afghanistan. But the US wanted a face-saving exit. And so they started to negotiate with Taliban not just in Trump regime but also during Barack Obama administration. In the last 2-3 years, the special emphasis on the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan was laid by ex-President Mr. Trump, who sent his special envoy Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad with a mandate to directly negotiate with Taliban, and that was a watershed moment. Because to begin with, it was the Taliban for which the country was attacked, and now you're ready to talk with Taliban, and that shift was brought completely by the Trump administration. And they were able to bring Taliban on the table. And ultimately a deal was signed where the United States of America promised to completely pull out from Afghanistan with all its machinery and troops. In return, the Taliban committed itself on 4 fronts: reduction of violence, that they would join the intra-Afghan peace talks which would involve the current government of Afghanistan as well, and in future they would cut ties with all foreign terrorist groups. This is what the Taliban had promised in the Trump-Taliban deal. So with these 3 points, if implemented, would mean that Afghanistan is going to be stable and not of cause of security concern for the Western world, because they have promised themselves that they would cut ties with the foreign terrorist groups, especially the groups like ISIS and remaining portions of Al-Qaeda. And they would agree to talk to the current Afghanistani government, which is not recognized or which is detested or hated by the Taliban. Now, after the agreement was signed, the US put pressure on the Afghan government to release thousands of Taliban prisoners, which was a key precondition of the Taliban talks. Now, at present, the peace process is frozen. Although the Taliban has reduced hostilities against the foreign troops, but has continued to attack the Afghan government and its military operations. Now, since the longest time we know that Pakistan has been quite an active supporter of Taliban. In fact, Pakistan was one of the 3 countries that had recognized the earlier Taliban regime in 1990s. The Taliban captured much of the country with the help from ISI. And after 9/11 attacks, Pakistan's military dictator Pervez Musharraf, under pressure from Bush administration, cut formal ties with Taliban and joined America's war on terror. But Pakistan so far has played a double game. And so why is Pakistan hell-bent on the return of Taliban in Afghanistan? What would Pakistan gain from Taliban's entry and control over Afghanistan? And the reason behind that is a key term known as strategic depth. Now, if you look at the map of Pakistan, it is a rectangular country broadly, and it is a very narrow country. The distance between its border with India and that of border with Afghanistan is not much, and so it is a very narrow country. Now, if both Afghanistan and India turn hostile to Pakistan at the same time, they could easily run over the country within few days. And what strategic depth means is for the Pakistan to create the areas of pro-Pakistani regimes in their surrounding countries, and that is the reason why they keep on fueling insurgencies in states like Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, and that is the reason why they want a Taliban government ultimately controlled by Rawalpindi. And now, since US is leaving and the Taliban are advancing, Pakistan is again in the spotlight. A violent military takeover of Afghanistan by Taliban may not serve Pakistan's core interest, because Pakistan wants to check India's influence in Afghanistan and bring the Taliban to Kabul. But a violent takeover like in 1990s would lack international acceptability of the Taliban, and it would also give rise to a lot of local militia hostile to Taliban. Also, it will lead to a lot of immigrants into the Pakistan just like the last time. Therefore, Pakistan wants Taliban back, but it wants Taliban to be back by a procedure which is acceptable to at least all the Afghans and recognized by the Western world. Now, in the past 2 to 3 months, quite a revelation was that India has started to reach out to Taliban, which has been quite contrary to the position which India has taken in the past. And so the obvious question, why is India trying to reach out to Taliban? And there are 2 proper reasons behind this particular move by India. First is that we have invested a lot of capital in Afghanistan, not just on creation of railway lines, creation of port in Iran, creation of parliament and dams in Afghanistan, but there are other very small projects over there. We have built a lot of social capital in Afghanistan because of the positive work which has been done by us. And so once a Taliban government hostile to India or not in touch with India comes back, all of that will be gone, will be washed away. And the second is that we want to prevent a future Taliban regime which will be controlled by Pakistan just like the last time. Some of you might know that one of our aircrafts was hijacked and taken over to Kandahar, and we could not get it back only because we did not have direct communication with the Taliban, and we do not want the repeat of the same thing. And if we see a probability of Taliban getting access and total control over Afghanistan, we would want that government to be in talking terms with New Delhi, if not complete friendship. And so what are the likely scenarios in Afghanistan in the coming months or years? And there could be 3 scenarios according to experts. One is that there could be a power sharing settlement in which the Taliban and the government agree to some power sharing mechanism and jointly shape the future of Afghanistan. As of now, this looks remote possibility. The second is an all-out civil war in which the current government, which is economically and militarily trained by West, holds on to its positions in key cities and the Taliban expand its reach in the countryside. Whereas the third scenario would be the Taliban and a complete Taliban takeover in some months, which is the most likely scenario given the developments in past 1 month. So the next news which we are going to take up appears on page number 2. Crimes against women saw over 63% rise in 2021 so far. And it of course deals with the data which has been shared by Delhi police. So it only pertains to Delhi as a union territory or as a region, but not applicable across the country. But We know that there is a line in the syllabus of GS paper 2 which says welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of populations, mechanisms, laws constituted for the protection and betterment of these vulnerable sections. And we know that women is one of the most important vulnerable sections of all. And so, when we talk about crimes against women, they can be categorically divided through their life cycle stages, which has been represented in this particular flowchart. And the crimes against women actually start especially in Indian society, when they have not even taken birth. For example, in the form of female feticide and female infanticide just after they have taken birth. Then as they grow up and they reach their childhood and adolescence, we have problems of child abuse and child marriages, trafficking and sexual harassment. All these are crimes. When they reach their reproductive age, forced marriage, honor killings, marital rape and domestic violence are some of the peculiar violence faced by the women section. And of course, as they grow old, the problem of elderly abuse is quite common in Indian society. And so just like the crimes which are specific to the stages of women, we have laws to deal with specific crimes. For example, for female feticide, we have Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act and Regulation of Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act. Both of them make it very, very difficult either to identify the gender of the fetus or to terminate the pregnancy after knowing the gender of the fetus. Then we have Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. Of course, it is gender neutral, but it is nonetheless applicable to girl child as well. Then we have Child Marriage Restraints Act 1929, which restrains the solemnization of child marriage. And under this act, the legal age of marriage for male is 21 years and for female it is 18 years. Then with respect to special problem of rape and sexual abuse, we have Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, also known as Nirbhaya Act, which has widened the definition of rape and added new offences such as stalking and voyeurism, which did not exist earlier under penal codes. Then we have Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace 2013 to protect women from untoward incidents happening at workplaces, which will encourage more and more women to enter into workplaces. Then as far as honor killings are concerned, there is no separate law to deal with honor killings, but the existing penal code provisions like IPC sections 299, 304, 307 punishes the culprits of honor killing as well. Then for domestic violence, we have a committed act which is known by the name of Domestic Violence Act 2005, which gives protection to women from emotional, sexual and economic abuse. And we have Dowry Prohibition Act 1961, which prohibits the dowry system and concomitant harassment along with it. So from the perspective of mains examination, when you have to write down the laws and mechanisms to protect women, you can apply the life cycle approach, and in that you can mention the mechanisms for each stage of women as well. Let us now move on to the next news. Now the next small news has been taken from page number 12. Oil soars to multi-year highs after OPEC plus talks collapse. We know how oil prices have impacted all of us, and they are mainly because the group of countries which has complete monopoly over the production of crude oil has decided to cut the production. Since they are the major suppliers of crude oil, if they cut down the supply, the prices are going to be high. And this is what is happening. And so, with respect to this particular news, there are two things which you should know. The first is with respect to the group of countries, OPEC or OPEC plus. And the second is with respect to the crude oil and its compositions and different types of crude oils. For example, Brent, West Texas Intermediate, which has already been dealt with in the DNS. Now, if you look at the prelims syllabus, you would not know whether it is important or not. But just look at these two questions. Other than Venezuela, which one among the following from South America is a member of OPEC? Or for example, this question from 2016, which of the following is not a member of Gulf Cooperation Council or GCC? While the first question will be solved through this particular discussion, the answer to the second question is Iran, because Saudi Arabia, Oman and Kuwait, all three are members of GCC except or barring Iran. And so you know that organizations and groups like these are very, very important along with their memberships. So before looking at the membership, let us first understand few basics about OPEC, or Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries as they are known as, which is a permanent intergovernmental organization created at Baghdad Conference in 1960, and initially it had just the membership of Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. Now the secretariat is not located within the member countries. Everyone wants to enjoy and have a good time in Europe, and its center or its office is located in Vienna. Now as far as objective of OPEC countries are concerned, it is basically to create a conglomerate, to create a group of countries, all of them major exporters and producers of crude oil, and to control the prices of crude oil, whatever they may write in their objectives, but the real objective is a fair return on capital to those investing in the industry. And the fair return will be obtained only when all these countries operate in unison, when they operate in unity. When all of them decide to cut the production, all of them should follow it, which will result in increase in oil prices. And that is what they have been doing since last 1 year especially. So when we talk about oil producing countries, of course we will have to start from Middle East. We have Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, Iran and Qatar all located over here. Then we have Algeria and Libya. Then we have Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, Republic of Congo over here and Angola over here. We also have Gabon as a very small territory over there. And as far as South American countries are concerned, we have Venezuela. Earlier we had Ecuador as well, but now it is a former member along with Indonesia. So all these countries marked in blue or shaded in blue color are current existing members of OPEC. And so when this question was asked, Ecuador along with Venezuela were the members of OPEC, but no more. So if the question is asked right now, it will be reformulated, but when the question was asked in 2010, the answer was Ecuador. Let us now move on to the next news. Then the next news deals with polity. And it is a very important news because through this particular news item, you can revise two very important articles of our constitution on which our whole parliamentary system of government is based upon. Amid cabinet reshuffle buzz, 8 states get new governors. So all of you must be knowing that today there is going to be very widespread cabinet reshuffle by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And so when he is going to determine who is going to be the minister, who is going to be the cabinet minister, and who is going to resign as a minister, he must have a power enshrined on him by the Constitution of India, and that is done specifically by Article 74 and Article 75. And so let us now quickly deal and understand the provisions. Article 74 first creates the Council of Ministers to aid and advise the President. There shall be a Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister at the head to aid and advise the President, who shall, in the exercise of his functions, act in accordance with such an advice. However, the President may require the Council of Ministers to reconsider such advice, and the President shall act in accordance with the advice tendered after such reconsideration. So there is an office of President who is the head of the state and head of the executive. To help him or her function, there is a Council of Ministers which is headed by the Prime Minister. It is the job of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to keep on advising President, because all the decisions will have the signature of President. In some cases, President might not like these advices, and so the President might ask the Council of Ministers to reconsider some of the advices. But after reconsideration, if the same advice is sent back, President has no option but to sign on that advice. And the advice tendered by the ministers to the President shall not be inquired into any court. So you cannot go to Supreme Court and ask as to what the cabinet had suggested to the President with respect to this particular matter. This is totally shielded and hidden in secrecy. Then Article 75. We know how Article 74 has already created the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister. But how they will be appointed, and so that is dealt with in Article 75, which says the PM shall be appointed by President and other ministers shall be appointed by the President on advice of Prime Minister. And this is the power which makes the position of Prime Minister as a key person in the parliamentary democracy, because he is the one who decides who will be the minister and who will not be the minister. There is a limit on total number of ministers, including the Prime Minister, which shall not exceed 15%. This provision was inserted later on in 2003 by 91st Constitutional Amendment. Now, the ministers hold office during the pleasure of the President, and they are collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, which means that they sail and sink together. If Prime Minister resigns, all the ministers will automatically have to resign. If the government loses majority, they all lose majority, they all lose their posts. And a minister who is not a member of parliament for any period of 6 months in continuity, they shall cease to be a minister. And this is what has happened to the Uttarakhand chief minister also, because the same provision is applicable at the state level as well. So these two are quite important constitutional provisions because they are the foundation of our parliamentary democracy. This last article for today's discussion appears on page number 7 as a form of a column. Vacancies send a wrong signal, where the author says that a lot of top posts in the government are unoccupied, and which ultimately affects governance and is very, very demoralizing for the officers of the government. Of course, the point is quite correct, and he specifically talks about how the position of CBI director was lying vacant for a very long time. And one of the posts in election commission, we know there are 3 members of election commission, one being the chief election commissioner. And so one of the positions of election commission is also lying vacant. And so in this regard, let us now deal with 2 of the important constitutional bodies, CAG and CEC, and how they are appointed. So appointment of CAG is done from Article 148. Which is the Comptroller and Auditor General is created through Article 148, which will be an independent authority under the Constitution of India. He will also head Indian Audit and Account Department and Chief Guardian of Public Purse. CAG is appointed by the President of India by a warrant under his hand and seal, and shall be removed from office in like manner and on like grounds as a judge of a Supreme Court. So you can understand how important the post of CAG is just by the virtue of appointment and removal method. The appointment of election commissions are done under Article 324 Clause 2, which states that President shall, with the advice of Council of Ministers, appoint Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissions. Of course, there is a provision of parliamentary law, but no law has been enacted so far. Now, the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners hold office for 6 years or till they attain the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier. They can resign, of course, at any time by addressing their resignation to the President. From the perspective of prelims examination, these 2 offices are very, very important, and so is their process of appointment and removal. The answer for the yesterday's question is neither 1 nor 2. And a lot of people have doubt with respect to the statement 1 being wrong. Now, the statement 1 is wrong because the original constitution did not have any such provision dealing with all India judicial services. Since it did not have, it could not have been implemented. And so that is why statement 1 is wrong and statement 2 is obviously wrong.